When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode.
Now, businesses are, it's simple. You're creating demand, you're fulfilling demand, or you're there to support the creation or the fulfillment of demand. That's it. Mm-hmm. And where those three circles intersect, that's where leadership sits, because they care about creating demand, fulfilling demand, and making sure that people like HR and legal and everyone else are, making sure you're doing it without creating any problem. So if you want to have any influence, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot, because if you do not have influence, you have nothing. All these skill sets at the end of the day come together for you to have influence. And if you walk into talking to a leader and you do not have the ability to discuss value proposition, meaning creation, fulfilling of demand, you are going nowhere. So let me transition this to executive protection. So I know this is very near and dear to your heart. Executive protection, and same in the military as it is in corporate security, is your job is to make sure that you're preserving the organization's ability to function effectively and efficiently. So when you look at, your job in security risk management, which I would say executive protection falls really right in the middle of all that, is to make sure that I am limiting the likelihood and consequence or impact of a security event. Now, there's no such thing as zero risk, right? And you've seen the lovely little picture of the possum with a machine gun. The odds of being killed by a possum with a machine gun are low, but never zero. There's no such thing as no risk. You always have to consider there will be a security incident. So then your job is to limit the amount of impact and then being able to recover more quickly. So why is this so important? Because I'm going to go business. I'm going to go really deep business here.
Nice.
So companies are made up. You have assets. You have resources. Mm-hmm. Resources are whatever you have: your people, your money, your operations, and they help you build capabilities, skills. So I've got resources. The more I apply my resources, the more time I spend getting that on-the-job training, I have better capabilities. So the greater capabilities, the more I can do. So resource capabilities. If I shorten the time between I have a security incident, if I have nothing in place, it could be devastating. But if I have programs in place, defense in depth, we've trained for this, we can go into all the rules about it, then I'm shortening that time from incident to recovery. And by doing that, I'm making sure that our capabilities are preserved as much as possible. So executive protection, let's talk about that. What are some of those capabilities that we're protecting? Well, first off, we're protecting the ability for that leader to lead the company towards value proposition. In the military, that leader is leading you through crises on a day-to-day basis. You're there to make the military more effective, however you want to look at it. So the value added to an executive protection program is, one, I'm protecting shareholder equity. So what does that mean? Like every company, there's, typically publicly traded companies, there are shareholders. And your shareholders, actually I want to say stakeholders. Your employees are your stakeholders. The people who own stock in your company are stakeholders. Your customers are stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So that leader's job is to create value for all those people. Customers like products. They pay for the products. Employees have jobs. Maybe your factories are located in communities where they usually are. Well, guess what? You're supporting the community through your taxes, all those things. If something happens to a leader, it impacts shareholder equity. And that's bad. Something happens to Roy. I'll get flowers. Maybe a few people will, say they're sorry. But if something happens to an executive, it's going to have it could have a devastating financial impact on the viability of a company's profitability. So here's the hidden value in the executive protection program is if there is some type of event, whether it's a crisis, and this could be crisis management, if you can get out of executive protection, if there's some crisis going on, whether it's natural earthquake, whether it's man-made, which could be like an active shooter situation. It could be a technical failure, like a bridge collapses, an important computer system that does one thing you need to do collapses. Your job in going back in executive protection, if something happens with a leader, you are able to help protect that individual, shorten that recovery period to get that person back up doing what their day job is. You are dealing with the most important cost factor that is never captured, distraction. So having that leader, and this is the best thing about executive protection. When that leader gets into a vehicle or they go into a meeting and they know that you have got their back, they are focused on the moment. They are there to create value for the stakeholders, which you're one of them and everyone else is too. And that is money, because when something happens and they're distracted, everyone else becomes distracted. So being able to control that a level of distraction is critical. And I can tell you, it's not quantified 9 times out of 10. But that is
I never heard it explained that well, that an executive protection agent is a stakeholder within that organization he is protecting. Never heard it that way before.
Yep. And again, the job is absolutely essential, because again, how much value can you put on peace of mind? I'm a principal. I know I've got all this covered. I can focus on everything I'm doing right now. I could be sitting in a hotel at a meeting in, downtown Mexico City, Bangladesh, anywhere. But if I know I've got the right people there and they've got the right programs in place, I can focus on creating value for that company that I'm representing. Now, how is that executive protection program able to have that principal be able to trust you to that point? Back to influence. You have to have been able to explain, here's what our mission is. Here's why it's important, because we've never encountered a situation when a principal doesn't want protection, right? You see it every day in the news.
Right.
You've seen a famous singer who's got a rather famous football boyfriend who decided he wanted, he's an executive protection professional. Now, granted,
yeah,
he may be,
right.
I don't know him personally, so he may be very good at that. However,
just fall into that role automatically somehow.
You have, but however, this goes back to the importance of what perception is and reality. You may encounter an executive whose perception is that I'm looking for a 380-pound gorilla who's going to fight his way out of whatever.
Right.
When in reality, it is the individual who is able to look ahead and plan and have contingency plans that will help me avoid a situation. Because if there is a situation and we have to get out of it, we're already starting down that slope towards quicksand, right? I want the executive to be able to focus, whether he's on the way to the meeting, he's in the meeting, he's leaving the meeting, whatever. Go back to, that's the value, is peace of mind. It is insurance. And then now let's think about it.
Yeah.
When it comes to your business development Every time you go and you're building a program internally, wherever, is business development. So insurance, most executives have car insurance, they have home insurance, house insurance, fire insurance, whatever. Well, insurance is expensive. Sometimes our programs aren't cheap, but we're insurance. So what happens if you don't have insurance? Sure. The likelihood of something happening may be pretty far out there, but the results of not having insurance is catastrophic. And you see that all the time. So another way I like to go into is explaining that, listen, here's the services that we're offering. It's expensive, but here's why. Mm-hmm. And one of the services that you get are peace of mind and your ability to focus on your job, provide the leadership that everyone in this organization is depending on. So that's a good selling point. Make
Absolutely.
Analogies. I love analogies. And the reason I say this is and this is another great thing, you don't have to be a business person to do business development. You have to be a human being who has had experiences that you can turn into analogies. My secret sauce, almost everybody's been to a doctor, or they know how to drive, or they've driven a car. I do a lot of analogies around medicine, other stuff. And I'll steal this from a friend of mine who talked about they needed a program. There was a security gap they discovered. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, that's great. And this was not, this was another company. And they said that, well, we haven't had this for 5 years. So do we really need it? And his response was, if you were living in a house and you had a fire plug outside on the street and you found out it wasn't functioning, would you be okay with not fixing that? Mm. Now, wow. I could have explained it in business terms and it would have probably been okay. But I'm telling you, being able to put things in perspective from common human experiences, being able to explain in business terms is important too. But being able to have that human element is far. I think it's a combination, but it's far more impactful. Same as presentations. If you're doing presentations, nobody is ever going to remember a chart or numbers. Forget it. Tell a story.
Right. Tell a story.
Make it personal.
An emotional connection with the story. They won't forget the story.
Exactly. And when you make a connection with a principal, then they will remember. So another example of why this goes back to influence management is having that relationship, building that trust. And trust is earned. You have to demonstrate you know what you're talking about, whether it's you've got people that are certified, you've got programs in place. They don't have to see everything behind the curtain, but they need to know the basics. Why I'm protecting you, how I'm protecting you, and, how that actually fits into the company's strategy. That's highly important too. Always, always, always take things back to a business objective. Your job at a company, add value, you have to impact a business objective. Figure out which one it is pretty quickly and align with that. Once you've done that and you've established that relationship, then if something comes up, they'll remember to call you. But if you don't have that relationship, there may be some plan going on that you have no visibility into. And then you find out at 5 p.m. on Friday that, he's going to a meeting somewhere in an hour. That it's personal, but he neglected to mention it to you, right? Or her. Mm-hmm. So those are just examples of things that can go sideways. But going back to influence, building the rapport, gaining the trust, and then actually providing the service. So that's the other part too. You can't just have it on paper and not deliver.
I got to ask you, Roy, where do you see the industry going? I see it getting more chaotic out there with the current climate of the country right now, crime being at its worst, it's not getting any better. I definitely see the industry getting busier. What from where you're at 40,000 feet above sea level, you're looking down, where do you see this industry going?
So there's always going to be a need as long as you keep up with the world. So we talk a lot. Like, I'm a big believer in upskilling. I have probably spent most of my life upskilling and going back to, it started out that, I grew up in a very impoverished rural area, and I saw that the way out was typically, usually education. Yeah. Not always military, but military was a way for me to get to that education.
Sure.
Although never let education stand never let school stand in the way of education, something like that. Life experience means a lot too. But I knew if I wanted to get out of there, I was going to have to do something different. So, and then you think about during my period, you saw these revolutions happening. Did anybody ever anticipate my generation? We would actually have phones. I mean, you'd see them on TV, like a phone on a wrist from Dick Tracy days, which was huge. Nowadays, it's nothing. So the internet, smartphone, internet. ATMs were around. I just never saw them. I never knew they existed. But anyway, things like that, like changes. You have to adapt and be able to figure out how am I going to do this. So let's talk about, we are in, and this is a subject I love talking about, but we are in the fourth industrial revolution. And that is the advent of AI.
Wow, yeah.
So you start thinking about the world is changing. The threat picture is changing. Executive protection. Let's focus on executive protection because that's what we're here to talk about. One of the things that you're seeing happening more and more is executives are being subjected to frauds or likenesses of their voice, even on a video conference. They are used in the furtherance of fraud. And how that happens is a lot of times, their information is out there. I mean, now you can be on the deep web and may just be out there, which can create reputational risks as well for a company. So being able to offer the ability to go in and do an assessment of that principal's life, not just where you're living, is your house physically secured? What is out there about you? What is out there about your family? Because let me tell you, the greatest risk to anybody, and this is humans, your greatest risk as a teenager.
Wow, true.
Is because they put everything out. Now, this is me being my parents again, right? But there are also people who put things out there that are just, hey, loving my vacation in Hawaii.
Post. Go viral.
Why are you telling somebody where you are? Why are you telling somebody where you aren't? But being able to go and provide that as that additional layer of security. By the way, are you aware that your children are, their information has been exposed, or, they're talking about this? So a lot of times if you do not have a very good relationship with the executive, hey, I'm going to go in, I want to have somebody come in and take a look at your entire social profile. Now, that's why third parties are your best friend when it comes to that, because it takes, it takes you out of that box of being the bearer of bad news in some aspects. Not really bad news, but like, hey, by the way, were you aware that information is out there about this that is associated with you? And that's extremely important. So that's one aspect of where we've got to keep up. AI it's a tremendous tool, a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of risk. Most people in security will tell you it's risk. But let me tell you what the greater risk is. Sure. Not learning about it, not understanding how we can incorporate it. Is it going to be risk-free? No. What's the trade-off, risk and reward? Because if you try to tell people, you're not going to be able to use AI in operations, I promise you, as this new AI-enabled generation comes on board, or they're already there, they're going to find a way to use it. Now what's going to happen is you're just not going to have visibility of it. If it was internal, you'd have visibility. Now you've created a shadow IT issue, which is could be one of your worst nightmares. But understanding what it is, because if I have to go and have a conversation as an executive protection professional, why is this a risk? I have to be able to explain that. So that's just one example of where I see it going. You're right. Now, crime, let's talk about crime. Crime has actually decreased back to pre-COVID levels, at least in the U.S. for the most part, except key cities. But does that matter? No. Public perception is what matters.
Public perception, right, exactly.
And by the way, public perception is driven by what you're seeing in social media, on on TV, on the news, whatever. And that is also that will cascade over into what, your executives are seeing and hearing. So I go back to priorities. In the FBI, one of my training agent early on, or one of them came out training, maybe it was on a supervisor, I picked this up. But there are 3 priorities you have. You're going to have the priorities that you have set for yourself. You're going to have your mission priorities. Then you're going to have your boss's priorities. And those priorities for your boss's priorities may be driven by the headlines more than reality. So how are you going to manage that perception? So, and I give you a classic example. When it comes time to spending money, a lot of the things that you do both in the military, but especially in corporate world, is you are aligning your spending ask with your risk. So if there's a perceived risk that, the sky's falling around us, but the data's not there, and I go out and spend a lot of money on something that I can't tie to the actual data on a risk, that is not a healthy thing to do, because your job, you are a steward of the company's funds.
Absolutely.
And, it's got to be risk-based. And those are conversations that are tough to have sometimes. It's like, I know you want this, but the data is telling us that it is actually something different. And I've experienced that in the military a lot. And it was really, when you're talking about what's the currency you're spending on that, it's your time and your resources. You're telling me you want me to go do this. Well, I'm telling you that we're not, from an intelligence perspective, we're not seeing it. So back to commander's priority, I like going back to military stuff, PIR. You've got your commander's intent, your mission priorities, and they should be, and this is another great thing that will transition from the military. If you've ever spent any time with intel or even talked to them, you're going to have intelligence that drives your operations, and your operations will gather more intelligence to drive better operations. So it's that cycle. Do not send me to do something that is not going to be adding value, because the intelligence doesn't support it. Then,
sorry about that, audience. We just had a delay or something in the feed with Roy. He may.
Yeah, I lost you for a second.
We just had a break. You're on a roll there. Wi-Fi, who knows? Whatever it was.
It was fine. But like I said, that just goes back to the importance of, the executive protection has to evolve with with the world, because you've got technology's changing, it's advancing. People are being changed by a lot of this. So, we just have to be able, the world is evolving. We have to evolve with it. And being curious is the way you evolve with it.
Yeah, what I'm seeing too is the evolution of protective intelligence, how that's exploding and driving executive protection. I've seen it more probably in the last 5 years, probably more involved than it used to be, but it's now kind of in your face. I see more protective intelligence posts being put on Indeed and different companies say we need an analyst, insight GSOC analyst. So I see that driving the force of physical security now.
And the string you're going to find behind everything is data. I mean, that's always, you talk about intelligence, you're really talking about data in many aspects. So how can I use this intelligence, this data, to be able to support, here's the other thing about any kind of intelligence, predictive or not, it doesn't matter. Your intelligence is designed to do one of two things. You're either able to take an action on it, or you're able to make a prediction. If I can't make a prediction or take an action, it's not intelligence. It's something on a piece of paper that, the priorities may be pretty low on it. So that's going to be critical, is being able to explain that. That's one thing I would tell you, please, definitely focus on that, because if you can't make a prediction or take action on it, whatever.
It's worthless.
And again, if it's not timely, the great thing about intelligence that's not timely is it's pretty accurate, because you've had a chance to look at it and, but if it's not timely, it's not intelligence. It's really going to be history by the time somebody sees it. So, there's never, and this is the other thing that I advise everyone.
Sure.
There's no such thing as a 100% solution. You have to be comfortable with ambiguity. You have to be comfortable with 80%. 80% today is better than 0% tomorrow. And you go in there with, this is what I've got. It's based on standards. It's based on data. It's risk aligned. However, nothing is perfect, but this is what I put in place to be able to say, we're going to get the best outcome that we possibly can at this moment. Now, if something happens, it may happen. There is going to be failure. You can't fear failure. If you don't fail, you're not going to grow. It's better to fail small many, many times than to have one massive failure. So literally be okay with, making a mistake, learning from your mistake, and quickly incorporating that into, we talked about that. How do I lessen that recovery time? That's just that. Tabletops, great learning opportunities. Every single event that happens, after action reports. Don't wait 2 weeks to do an after action report. Do it as soon as you can. Little learning lessons, but continuous improvement, which is a great phrase that a CEO years ago had made a comment. And I love this. It was during an executive education program. I'm better today. It's about continual improvement. I'm better today than I was yesterday, and I'll be better tomorrow than I am today, because I'm going to fail and I'm going to learn from that failure. And, that's a very powerful statement. And I would say that goes to any program, but, in executive protection, you don't like to hear failure in executive protection. They're learning opportunities. So you just have to understand. Now, here's the other great thing about the executive protection. I'm going to make an analogy for you.
Okay.
Is I see a lot of people beat themselves up over an operation. They've considered it a failure. Okay, well, reset a little bit. Is your principal alive? Were they able to do were they able to complete their mission and get back to where they needed to? Were they distracted? Well, yeah, that not really, but all this other stuff in the background happened. Your mission was successful, and something didn't go right. You learned from it, and guess what? I go back to weddings. My goddaughter got married, and my only advice I gave to her was, be very simplistic. Don't go overboard into it, because at the end of the day, you're setting yourself up for failure a little bit. But here's the great news. If something doesn't go right, because you're so involved in the planning, you'll notice no one else who was involved in the planning will have any idea that wasn't your plan.
True.
So it's again, always remember that and this is one of the last points. I know we're probably, who knows how long we've been on here. One of the other learning points is, and this goes out through life. Yeah. One of the hardest things for you to do as a leader is to forget what it was like not to know something. So I have a lot of experience in certain areas. So if somebody's coming up and they're saying something, and it doesn't make sense to me. I have to stop and remember. And I forgot who. I think maybe the story was maybe Dale Carnegie had mentioned this. He was he was really hard on his son, and then he remembered that the problem is I'm measuring you by the yardstick of my own life. So it goes back to try to remember that the people you are leading or the people you're having conversations with do not have the information you have. It's very hard to remember what it's like not to know something. You have to be very deliberate in making sure that, as you're doing stuff, you're being able to explain things. So again, before you're hard on somebody, always put yourself in their shoes for what they know, where they are in that moment and that time. And that's a great thing to do during an after action review.
Absolutely. Right.
But that will also make you very successful in many ways, because now I have to think, okay, how would I explain this to my 20-year-old self? Now, here's the other learning thing that's also another just, classic rule. If I can't explain something in terms that a middle school student would understand, I probably don't know it as well as I think I do. And I need to go back, because so many people in the industry hide behind technical jargon, acronyms, everything else. And if you start peeling behind the layers, this is why I love education. The one thing education has given me, especially on the business side, is the ability to know what questions to ask. I spent a lot of time in certifications and all kinds of stuff. I love AI because it was new and I want to dig into it. So if somebody is leveraging AI, I want to be able to say, okay, you're telling me all this and you're using all these great terms like RAGs and LMs and everything else. I know enough to where I can ask the question to give me the answers I'm looking for, instead of just accepting that they obviously know what they're talking about.
Wow. Yeah, we took a big leap, folks, into a lot of content today with Roy. And you guys would probably need your notepads out and taking lots of notes, because this was like a masterclass in leadership and culture and AI. And so much information is awesome. Roy, before we wrap this up, I know you have some advice for those service members leaving the military. They're just done with the military, leaving, or say they're law enforcement trying to get out and they're just kind of done with being the cop and they want to try this, whatever they're trying to go to. Maybe it's going into private security. Maybe they're trying to do something completely different. What is your advice to those folks and giving them hope as they move on?
So number one is talk to as many people as you can who have already transitioned. Now, before I transitioned, I talked to over 100 people.
Wow.
And they all gave me advice, but I was able to take that down into those 3 nuggets that I gave you that came from all those interviews. So talk to as many people as you can. In the real estate world, it's all about location. Mm-hmm. In the job search market, it's networking. Smart
Interesting.
Networking. Yeah. So if you're trying, and let me put it to you, I'm going to put it out there that everybody says, "Oh my gosh, this is so different." The military, public service is so different from the private sector. Not really. Your resume is going to get 7-second review. If it gets to a human, they'll give you 7 seconds. So the resume doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to justify why they're hiring you over someone else. Mm-hmm. What's going to get you the job is the interview. And I jokingly say this to folks is like, well, you're here, you're going to have an interview. So, the job is yours to lose. But that networking will help you, because if I don't, the odds of me being able to get an interview at an organization where I have no contacts inside is very small. Now, networking, here's the great thing. You have organizations that are made up of veterans. You have LinkedIn where you can go and you can look at a company and say, do I know somebody there? Is somebody at that company a veteran who was maybe in my branch, my area, whatever? Reach out to them. informational interviews, anything you can do, is that, to be able to establish that, hey, I'm interested in this. I'm interested in your career. If something pops up, I cannot tell you the amount of people who apply for jobs who never reach out to the person who is advertising the position. And I can tell you those people who do reach out, you remember.
Absolutely.
Go back to it. It's research, networking. And the most important thing is surround yourself with as much of a support network as you can. Looking for a job is a full-time job. You're going to have to lean on your friends, your family, other people who've transitioned, because it's almost like you're going to need a cheerleader in your corner. Mm-hmm. You have to be your own cheerleader. You make your own happiness, but it's surrounding yourself with people. Go on and watch videos of people who have transitioned, who have great success stories. And okay, you know what? So here should be your best success story. If Roy can pull this off and transition, anybody can pull this off. Sometimes, but the key factor is the one thing, like in the military and everywhere else, you don't have control over the timing.
No.
So, make as many opportunities as you can, learn from every single opportunity, and just take that and go forward, and just know that, when the time comes, you're ready. Because I've also seen it where opportunity presents itself and you're not ready and it doesn't have a good ending. So, always prepare.
Great point. I had that kind of same situation where I was invited to attend a certain thing. I don't want to go into too much detail about it. It was out of state, and a friend of mine was very connected to that area. And I called him, hey, have you ever heard of this person? I've never heard of him before. I got invited to an event. He goes, yeah, I would not advise going or doing business with that individual because of XYZ. I'm like, oh. And you want to do your due diligence, like you said, go on LinkedIn, check them out, whatever. And due diligence is part of what we do in security, investigation. And so I did that. And I'm like, wow, that phone call saved me a lot of heartache that I didn't know I would run into if I were to become partners with that individual. Mm-hmm. And happily, I have a friend, a really good friend of mine. He knew all about that person. He gave me scenario after scenario, some bad business stuff that was going on. I'm not going to say names on the podcast, but you got to do your due diligence and looking for a job. Like Roy said, reach out, make a contact. Hey, I get 5 minutes of your time, 5 minutes. People are, I reach out to Roy and say, hey, love to have you on a podcast. And I think you can share a lot of knowledge and experience from your walk in life to a lot of our veterans and law enforcement trying to figure out where they're going to go next.
Yeah, and the great news is you've already had experience in all this. Before you ever took a step, whether you're walking into, you're showing up at a new post, you're in a new country, you're getting ready to go into a battle, you're approaching somebody you want to interview. What are you doing? I want to establish as much information as I can about the individual, about the situation, because that's going to drive my approach for how I'm going to meet this objective. And that's the great. So people, I see they get ready to transition in the private sector and they're really not sure. I'm like, well, do what you always do. Look at that job as being that person you want to cultivate as an informant, or it's that interview of somebody who doesn't want to talk to me. Go about it through that aspect. Apply all those things you've learned throughout the totality of your career. You'll probably be pretty successful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of people, they just don't believe in themselves lately. They just, they lost their way in their journey. But we went on a masterclass with Roy here, and he, gave up some time of his day to help us out, give him some advice to our military law enforcement folks. And Roy, thanks for your time. I appreciate you greatly for doing this for the audience.
Yeah, I appreciate you for having me on here. And again, for anybody out there who's still in the military, still, out there in law enforcement, any other first responder, you are my hero. you are out there still continuing to fight the fight, and it's a good fight. So thank you for that. Anything, again, that can, if only one thing here resonated, it was absolutely worth the time. So I appreciate everything that you do, and I look forward to seeing you on the other side.
Thanks, Roy. And for the audience listening to this podcast, please feel free to follow Roy on LinkedIn. You can follow us on all the podcast platforms and give us a rating on that. And then also subscribe to us on YouTube. This will be published on our YouTube channel. Hit the like button to have the algorithms and kicks that up a little bit too. And if it wasn't for my guests like Roy coming on the show, nobody would listen to the show. I mean, everybody knows my story, but it's a pleasure and honor to have Roy with his background as a guest on the show. And we have many more content coming out. We have the Fearless Mindset Retreat Mixer coming on with Brian Jang, formerly with the FRB. We're in planning stages of that fireside chat with him, and we'll be doing some announcements on that. But with that said, thanks for tuning in the show and listening to what Roy has to say in his journey, in his life, and his career. Thanks for tuning in, folks, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Fearless Mindset Podcast. See you soon.